Welcome back to Questing Beast, I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at The Bizarre World of Fake Video Games by Super Eyepatch Wolf. Yes, the YouTuber Super Eyepatch Wolf. A few years ago, I released a video called Vermis, the horror game that doesn't exist, and it kind of blew up and became one of the most popular videos on my channel. It covered this strange little book, which is like a guide to a video game, which, like I said in the video, doesn't actually exist. It's this kind of exploration of the art of video games and the worlds of digital media from this very unique perspective with some really incredible art by Plastaboo. Well, a little over a year after my video came out, the YouTuber Super Eyepatch Wolf also released a video called The Bizarre World of Fake Video Games. And this video had a somewhat similar thumbnail, and it also covered games like Vermis, along with a whole bunch of other ones that I had never heard of. Now, I have no idea whether he was inspired by my video or not, and it's perfectly fine if he was. I'm a big fan of Super Eyepatch Wolf. I've seen quite a few of his videos over time, and I'm really glad he made his video because it exposed me to a lot of new media that I had never seen before. Well, it seems like he got in contact with the publisher Hollow Press and has created this book covering this whole strange art phenomena. But what's really remarkable about the whole thing is that it just doesn't cover these fake video games in a very, dry, straightforward way, but it's like this book is actually another one of them in a strange sense. And that's because this book is a kind of in-world artifact. Most of the articles inside it reflect the kinds of things that you would see in old gaming magazines, but they're all in a world where these games were real. It's like all these fake video games existed in a parallel dimension, and we're getting a view into that world. Now we're going to take a look through this book today, but we're also at the end of the video going to be taking a look at a whole bunch more, because this has become a bit of a phenomenon of artists and designers creating these manuals for games that don't exist. Now, are all of these things worth reading? Well, you'll have to decide for yourself. Are they part of an exciting new trend in media, exploring game worlds from this new angle, or are they kind of ripoffs of Vermis, the one super big hit in the genre? But before we jump into the book, a quick shout out to today's sponsor. This video is sponsored by Into the AM, creator of some of my favorite t-shirts, especially their basic tees, which have quickly become some of my favorite t-shirts of all time. I am not kidding when I say that these are some of the most comfortable t-shirts that I own. I wear them to bed, I wear them out on errands, to the gym, anywhere really. And I've owned some of these t-shirts for years, and none of them have ever worn out. They're extremely well made. And right now you can save up to 50% on their basic tees, especially when you buy them in one of their big basic tee packs, which should keep you stocked up for a very long time. Big thanks to Into the AM for sponsoring this video. Make sure to check them out using the link down in the description below. All right, let's see what we get inside The Bizarre World of Fake Video Games. There is a ribbon bookmark here. The books are very sturdy and very well constructed. And we start off with this little introduction that immediately hints that things are not as they seem. It's a little bit hard to figure out exactly what's going on, but it hints that this whole book may be from some kind of parallel timeline or alternate world. It also implies that some of these games or some of these articles are somewhat anomalous. It reminds me a little bit of the SCP Foundation. Now, right at the outset, I think some of these are actual real projects that other artists have worked on prior to the writing of this book. And I think some of them may be new projects that he brought on other artists to work on. I don't actually know 100% which ones are which. And honestly, that's kind of part of the appeal. I really want to go in assuming that all of these different game projects are from this alternate world. Each game gets its own little file right here. This one is Ghost Trap. It's part of a series of Ghost Trap games, and the whole history of how they developed and changed over time is actually kind of funny. It has which console they were on, which is the Hollow Sphere console, and we'll see these consoles develop as the years go by. It has the contamination level. Not clear exactly what that means, but it's very low in this case, and the artist who designed it. And all these games are very strange, although somewhat still believable in a strange way. This one, Ghost Trap, seeks to ask a simple, tantalizing question. What would it be like to date a sexy ghost? It has this very strange character that's like a sheet with human legs sticking out of the bottom, and it has this whole history that's developed around it as well, where the fans who got into this game became way too interested in dating Cynthia, the sexy ghost, and this offended even the creator of the original game. Our next one is called Apple Quest. Reminds me a little bit of the old Pokemon games, in that you have these different monsters that are doing damage to each other, and you're traveling around this pixelated landscape. One thing I really like about this whole book, though, is that it has all of these different fake video games, but the art styles and the design work on each of them is often very different and very distinct. You can really tell that there's different artists who have developed their own vision for these games and are expressing it in their own ways. And that's just what you would expect if there was a real compendium of video games that no one had ever heard of from this era. There's some similarities in terms of the art styles for some of them, but by and large, they feel very distinct and personal. So we have the sequel to Ghost Trap here, The Legend of the Spectral Fist, and this is part of the strange history of this whole series, where the second one was published by a totally different publisher, and instead of being a kind of dating simulator, now it's a scrolling beat 'em up. And this, of course, was very divisive for the fan base, many of whom were outraged at the huge change in the goals of the game. And here's Ghost Trap number 3, Haunted Home Designer, where again, this series goes in a wildly different direction and becomes a haunted house builder sim of a kind. Unfortunately, it was loathed not just by the original Ghost Trap fanbase, but enthusiasts of The Legend of the Spectral Fist, which was the second one, who saw this game as a sanitized, chaste imposter. The Ghost Trap franchise war now became a three-way bloodbath, each side desperately fighting for their game to be the true Ghost Trap. I feel like I've heard this story before. This next one's called Kobold Quest. Again, a totally different art style, a different aesthetic than the ones before it. It's very refreshing and just exciting to flip to the next page and see what you're going to get, and to take the world as seriously as this book takes it. But now we've moved on to the next generation of Holosphere, Super Holosphere, and the graphics are beginning to improve somewhat. But the actual content of these games is getting creepier and more eerie. For example, this girl character who is missing her entire face. Now that we're getting up to the Hyper Holosphere console, we're starting to get actual primitive 3D graphics, although this one also has the nice touch of having these live action cutscenes, which I remember from a lot of games back in that era. The types of games that you get become increasingly eerie as time goes by, with these stories of developers developing strange psychological conditions or vanishing, or weird games that seem to be impossible. For example, this game, Load Trippy, where every time you load it up, you get completely new, unique environments. Even if you load up the game hundreds of times, you never see the same environments twice. And that seems like that should be impossible, especially for a game from that era. There's no way they could have created that many different places to explore. One of the fun little touches throughout this whole book is that as you read it, you start being able to pick out the distinct voices of the different reviewers of this video game magazine. Like, this reviewer is always very over the top and is angry that there's no guns, no explosions, and no babes. Is this even a video game? And is prepared to give this a 0 out of 10 review, but is slowly won over to it over time. By the time we're getting up to the 4th entry in the Ghost Trap franchise, our contamination level is reaching high. Again, it never really explains what that means. This one feels a little bit like Alone in the Dark, the early 3D version of that, complete with its description of the incredibly difficult and obtuse controls. But the deeper that we go into this book, the more references we start getting from the reviewers of the world outside these games, the world that the reviewers are actually living in, and how things are not going well. There's implications that portals may be opening, and there are gates or shadows that are now infesting the world that everyone has to deal with. It never really goes into detail about what these things are and how they're affecting everyone, but you get the sense that the world is beginning to completely fall apart. Just like a lot of these games feel like they're part of a lost memory, some aspect of your past that you can barely remember. So the world around them is also disappearing from existence and collapsing in on itself. Some of these more contaminated video games have a record of just appearing on store shelves, and then parents picking them up and taking them to the counter, and the person behind the counter having never seen them before, and it's unclear where they came from or what they're doing. And in many cases, they seem fairly straightforward and benign at first, but then get darker and darker as time goes by. In some of them, the reviewers themselves seem to start losing themselves in the game, describing day by day their experience of playing, noting bugs and pluses and minuses. But as things go by and the game gets stranger and stranger, it begins affecting the reviewers themselves, who start losing track of time and possibly their own sanity. The final book that's looked at is Vermis itself, where the contamination is total. The implication being that Vermis is the final element in this long string of catastrophes that is tearing this world apart, and that possibly due to Vermis, their world has collapsed, and now these things are beginning to leak into ours. Really, this whole book is just a fun way to create this unified universe of all of these art projects and tie them together into a system that kind of makes sense, that you have to piece together on your own. And I love how all of the artists that worked on this book have lots of links in the back of the book, so you can look up their work if you want to. Now, as fun as this book was to read, it's really only scratching the surface because the same publisher, Hollow Press, has a whole series of books by a variety of authors going even deeper into this new art trend. Let's take a look at some of them real quick. For example, we have Mock Soul, The Devil Maze Pilgrimage by the Salamander King. Plucked from the ether and cast into the maw of the maze, your soma consumed by time and again, all for the salvation of your exiled god. Will you obey or curse them for eternity? What does that mean? Well, you don't really find out, I don't think. It's one of those games or one of those books that is very vibes-based, similar to Vermis. It's a different art style, but it's definitely inspired by Vermis, has that kind of washed out, slightly pixelated look where it's very dreamy and it implies a world and implies a game that you're kind of filling in with your own mind as you go. I do like the art in this, but there's definitely a choice that's been made to make it very washed out and often difficult to read. I think that's quite intentional. It's there to make it feel a little bit more surreal and to cause you to work a little bit more in terms of filling it in. Or a new book by Plastiboo, God Husk Rebirth. You can see that it does have a similar style to Vermis because it's the same artist, but it has a, I don't know, it feels like a more pixelated look together with a style that focuses more on body horror. It's very Geiger-esque, a lot of kind of biomechanical elements. It reminds me a little bit of the short story and the video game, actually, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. So if you enjoyed that, then this might be the right kind of thing for you. It's getting pretty close to my edge in terms of grossing me out, though. Other books in that series go right to the edge and then go flying off of it, like this one, Final... Am I even allowed to say that on YouTube? I feel like I'll get demonetized. Where again, the goal here is really just to kind of gross you out, I feel like, and to be as horrific and as ugly as humanly possible. So not something I'm really going to enjoy reading, I would say, but I don't know. I'm sure there's someone that's into it. Here's another one, Bubzium, The Guidebook to Post-Poland by Bartosz Zakorski. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. And this one definitely has a vibe that's much more like H.R. Geiger, even more so than the other ones, where it feels like he's really going for that particular style. It looks like the interior of the ships from Alien. One big theme that you see throughout these books is that they're mostly describing creatures to a certain extent, but primarily environments. Really weird and off-putting worlds that you can imagine yourself traveling through, or maybe gaming through if this was a video game. So despite them often being framed as fake video games, I feel like it's best to think of them as world-building art projects, right? These are just ways for artists to show off their world-building skills and their ability to evoke a mood and a kind of place. And because so many people today experience world-building through the medium of video games rather than through books, that is the medium that is used. I like that this one has a lot of first-person views throughout, which we don't see in a lot of the other books. It creates this sense of being in a first-person hack-and-slash game, perhaps, although one that is fully illustrated and painted rather than CGI. And there's a couple like this one that feel like they are very close to just being a source book for a tabletop RPG, which is what I tend to review on this channel anyway. I don't know, if you've read a lot of RPG manuals and monster books and so forth, the formatting and the design just feels very D&D-like, especially OSR-like. It's definitely been formatted for ease of use in a way that a lot of the other books very intentionally are not. The whole trend is really fascinating to me because in both the video game world and the RPG world, we're starting to see more and more people not just design those games, but to kind of strip out the game element of it and leaving behind the feelings and the aesthetic of those things. And a lot of people really don't like that because they want the things that they buy to be much more concrete and much more useful and not have this kind of surface level aesthetic being pulled out of this underlying substructure. But I think it's perfectly valid for artists to realize that the video games and the RPGs that we've played throughout our lives create these psychological impressions on us. And it can be very interesting to try and evoke those impressions directly instead of through their original mediums. So I'm really curious to hear your impressions in the comments below. Do you think this whole trend of creating these fake video games and video game worlds was a one-trick pony that Vermis pulled off, if you even liked Vermis? Or do you think that this is something that can be continually extended and developed over time to create its own unique art form? The huge amount of diversity in terms of the aesthetics and the approaches that you see in this book especially were really interesting to me, and I'd be very curious to see where it goes. It does have a number 1 down here at the bottom, so perhaps Super Eyepatch Wolf will make a sequel. In any case, thanks for listening to me babble about these games for a while. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.